Have an all-star lineup today for keynote speakers. And the first keynote speaker is going to be retired Lieutenant General Vincent Stewart. Vince is a focused, oriented leader with more than 30 years of experience covering all aspects of cybersecurity, intelligence, and counterintelligence. He has developed highly effective teams at a national level. He was the Deputy Commander of the United States Commander of the Cyber Command. Vince provided strategic leadership to over 10,000 employees across a spectrum of 3 million users, over 140 countries, as well as 15,000 different networks and 6,000 different locations. So you can imagine the expansive network responsibility that the retired Lieutenant General Vincent Stewart had to manage. Vincent was also the director of the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, where Vincent managed global organization of over 16,000 personnel across 100 countries, delivering intelligence on the military of possible capabilities, threats, vulnerabilities. Vincent also used to report and give brief updates to the United States President at the time. And he was also responsible to briefing Congress on budgets and emerging threats, and also any issues that may be of critical use. Part of that critical infrastructure was under Vincent's control to secure. He also reported to the Joint Chief of Staffs of the United States as well. Please put your hands together and give a warm welcome to retired Lieutenant Vince Stewart. Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
So I'm smiling because I don't have the job anymore. First of all, I'm delighted to be here, and Samir, thank you for a very gracious introduction. A couple of things before we get started. I'm hopeful that at the end of my talk, most of you will walk out of here and go, he didn't tell me anything new. I know all this stuff. And why do I say that? I say that because I think if we are serious about our business, the profession that looks after cybersecurity and vulnerabilities, we know most of what I'm going to talk about. If you don't, I'll be here, and I'll be happy to answer follow-on questions. I represent today Ankura, who is a global consulting company that has cybersecurity in its portfolio. So we're here to help. So that's the first thing I want to make sure everybody understands. Second thing I am not a technician. There are tons of folks here who can talk about the technical aspects of cybersecurity. What I am is an intelligence officer for 30 plus years, spending my time trying to understand how folks would use different weapon systems, different platforms to achieve their effects. And so I'll talk a little bit more about the threat and the lessons learned. What is important to me at this conference is that we share, we collaborate, and we work together to solve this incredible challenge that we call defending our things in cyberspace. We cannot do this as individual organizations. We can only do this and be successful if we collaborate and work together to achieve success. So that's me, and I'm still smiling. And this is what we'll talk a little bit about, the current cyber landscape. We'll talk a little bit about resilience. You hear a lot of folks now emphasizing resilience. What does that mean? What does it look like? How do you inform your leadership? How do you inform your board so they're thinking about resilience? So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then I'll stand by to take any hard questions at the end of this. So this is kind of an interesting quote by the former director of the FBI. Only two types of companies, those who have been hacked and those who will be hacked. I actually think there's a third category. It's those who have been hacked and don't realize they've been hacked. Because most of the threats are very persistent, and usually you don't see their activity until they come to the surface. So there are folks who've been hacked, folks who will be hacked, and folks who have no idea that they've been hacked. And they're operating as if everything is fine, but there's risk out there. You know all of these. You've seen the reporting on what's happened with Colonial Pipeline, Marriott, all those companies that have had major breaches. But there's so much more because it's underreported. AmeriGas, one of the largest U.S. pipeline natural gas provider, was hacked. 8 seconds was the duration of the hack. In that 8 seconds, they took 100 credentials of workers. They took an operator in New Hampshire and basically captured individual IDs, social security number, credentials. Now, they didn't do anything else with that hack, but 8 seconds is all it took for them to penetrate and steal 100 pieces of information that could be used at some other point. On the screen, there's OPM, Operations, a government entity that holds the information for those who seek a security clearance. 21.5 million records were taken in that OPM breach. 21.5 million records. One arrest that came out of that attributed to a Chinese national. And we have no idea, I think we can postulate, we can kind of guess what a nation state would do with 21.5 million records of people who have applied for and gained a security clearance. That could set the condition for an awful lot of activity over the next several years. 21.5 million records. I'll talk a little bit about Colonial Pipeline. That event that took place during a very short period of time that impacted the gas infrastructure of the United States. Their target was breached. $21 million in lost revenue. Atlanta, Baltimore, cities that have been held hostage by ransomware attackers who penetrated their network. In the Baltimore case, if I remember the numbers correctly, they asked for about $250 million ransom. The city of Baltimore said, no, we would not pay the ransom. It cost them $2.1 billion to rebuild their infrastructure. That's the cost of ransomware. Let's talk about Colonial Pipeline a little bit. You've probably seen this. The timeline here on the screen shows you what occurred over about a 10-day period, really less than 10 days. Breach occurred, data was exfiltrated, data was encrypted. The ransomware attacker, DarkSide, asked for $4.4 million in Bitcoin. I'm not quite sure what happened to DarkSide, but somewhere along the way in the process, they decided, we really don't want to hurt society. We just want to make money. And Colonial Pipeline paid the funds. The impact of this infrastructure attack, pipeline from Texas to New York were shut down. Gas stations ran out of gas. Panic across the community occurred because they couldn't get the gas. And this should be a lesson for us to think about the impact of an infrastructure that's taken over by ransomware attackers. Colonial Pipeline paid the ransom. DarkSide decided they didn't want to harm society. Ultimately, we were able to recover some of the funds, $2.3 million of the funds that DarkSide was paid. But here's the real lesson. The lesson is that Colonial Pipeline had an assessment done 3 years prior to the attack. They identified poor management procedures. They identified the fact that the chief information security officer was not well equipped and was not empowered. They identified that there were vulnerabilities in their network that could be breached. And even though they spent millions of dollars, they didn't focus on the key issues that would protect their infrastructure. So you can pay lots of folks to do assessments, but if you're not willing to take those necessary steps to protect your network, protect the individual, protect your data, then it's interesting money spent, but not terribly useful going forward. So Colonial Pipeline knew that they had vulnerabilities. They knew that there were risks. They failed the fundamental step. Once you understand risk, what do you do to manage and mitigate those risks? And Colonial Pipeline failed to do that, and the impact was felt by a whole host of U.S. citizens who were impacted by the loss of gas pipeline, from the gas pipeline. You know this. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about nation states in the next slide, but here are the players. It used to be that this was a purview of nation states. It is no longer just nation states that have this capability. The cost of entry into this space to be disruptive is pretty low. So whether you have a beef, an activist, you're a criminal, and I'll digress a little bit. I haven't validated this yet, so be careful if you use this. But someone told me that there's a nation state in the Pacific that gets about 30% of its GDP by financial crimes on the internet. Think about that. 30% of a nation's GDP from criminals getting into the financial networks and systems globally. So you have a range of players. We don't often think about competitors as part of that landscape. But I'd encourage you to think about what your competitor might do to get your data and be disruptive in this space. Here's the cost. Significant impact, and increasing every year the cost of defending in this space. The cost of coordinating, the cost of gathering the right intelligence, the cost of defending, the cost of insurance. Cyber insurance has more than tripled over the last 2 years. And no one really knows whether or not the insurance company will pay that insurance, because I'm sure any insurance folks here? Okay, I can speak bad about them then. I'm sure there's some fine print somewhere that says we will only pay on Thursday, first Thursday of the month, of that, something. But the cost of insuring in cyberspace has continued to increase. The target area that we see most cyber attack today is the healthcare sector. Why? Because when a device is certified by the medical community for healthcare reasons, they generally don't want anyone tinkering with that. So it leaves tremendous vulnerability, but the cost is going up. All right, let me spend some time with this one. Why do nation states have this cyber capability? Because nation states want to influence the action before, during, and after military operations. I want to understand what you're thinking. I want to understand the decisions that you'll make, and I want to be disruptive as possible. So I want to deny, I want to degrade your capability, I want to deceive in this space, and if necessary, destroy in this space. And we're seeing that play out significantly, although probably not as much as I thought it would, in the Ukraine conflict. Russia had no restrictions on using cyber in warfare. We saw that in 2007 in Estonia. We've seen it in the precursor to the conflict in Ukraine. We see it as part of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. And we call it nonlinear warfare, but it really isn't nonlinear. It really is warfare. It's just plain simply warfare. What do you know, and how do you make decisions, and how can I disrupt that? And the flip side, obviously, is how do I protect my own? So we're seeing Russian activity, both Russian activity by the nation state, Russia, but also, more dangerous in my opinion, the proxies who are supportive of the ideas. And now the challenge becomes, how do you attribute those activities and take those counter steps necessary to defeat those activities? So we continue to see the rise of activity in cyberspace. I'll tell you, if you ask me, I would say the threats in cyberspace probably ranks as Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, in that order. And I'm careful to say that because China has tremendous capability and tremendous mass, but the real next level is probably Russia. And they're doing it with nation-state activity, they're doing it with proxies, they're doing it with criminals, and it's all loosely integrated, but aimed at having decisive effect. I want to stop you from seeing the battlefield. I want to make sure that I can impact your economy. I want to make sure I use this in diplomatic ways. So any way that I can integrate cyber activity to get the desired effect, and the desired effect is to bend the will of your adversary. All of those countries that I mentioned, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, all have not only cyber capability, they have cyber organizations, they have doctrine that supports their activity, and they've demonstrated the willingness to use that capability. All have demonstrated the willingness to use that capability. So that's what we're seeing in Ukraine today. So what does all this mean for us? What is resilience all about? What do we know about our environment? And how can we operate effectively when we want to in our environment? And why do I phrase it that way? We may not want to have complete capability across the entire spectrum, but we've got to make sure that we understand what is important to us the first minute, the next 10 minutes, the next hour. Resilience is making sure that we understand our environment and we're able to get back online as quickly as possible with the things that are important to us in that particular moment. In that particular moment, making payroll might be the most important thing. So do we understand that in context and are able then to get back online and operating as quickly as we can in that environment? So that's what the whole resilience is. It is stunning to me how few people understand what data they have, what's important in their data, what's most important in their data, and are building the things to protect that and make that available ready immediately after there's a crisis. Remember, it's not whether or not you're going to be hit, it really is a question of when you will be hit. We're all on the target line, right? I don't have my smartwatch on, but many of you will have smartwatches on. We're all part of that network. So you've got to be ready on day one, minute one, 10 minutes into the problem on how you get back online and operational in an instant. That's what the whole resiliency effort's all about. Continuity of operations, make sure that we can get our business functions up and ready, and we have the agility to operate across our enterprise. Let me go back here. There used to be 7. There are 7 things that I tell people. I'm missing one here. If you want to focus on some of the best practice to be effective in your organization, you got to understand identity management. Who's on your network, what privilege they have. You've got to do multi-factor, 2-factor authentication. If you're not doing that, you're setting yourself up for a crisis. You've got to be able to understand your data and segment your data based on what you need and when you need it. And I talk about perimeter defense, although I'm not a huge fan of firewalls. But you've got to have enough perimeter defense to make it difficult for an adversary to get to your crown jewels. And the next one is probably the one that I find really disturbing, that many organizations do not have an incident or crisis management plan, and some of the ones who have it have not exercised their crisis management. If you're not doing regular tabletop exercise to understand how you will deal with a crisis, when the crisis occurs, it's the wrong time to try to figure out what you're going to do next. So you've got to have a crisis management plan. You've got to exercise it. You've got to do it on a routine basis. If you encrypt your data, it becomes interesting when someone grabs your data. And so I encourage people to make sure you're encrypting your data at rest and in motion to create challenges for your potential adversary. I won't spend a whole lot of time talking about Ankura. These slides will be available. Suffice to say, we are here to be helpful, just like all the vendors here. And feel free to jump on my colleagues as they help you think about what your environment looks like and how to best defend your environment. Okay, with that, I'll stop. If there are questions, I'll take questions. If not, Samir, I think maybe I'll get you back on schedule. Question? Don't ask any hard questions, please.
Thank you, Vincent, for this fruitful session. Actually, my name is Hashim Al-Azizi, cybersecurity manager in Taqa. Actually, you've mentioned some lights on the cybersecurity insurance, and I think there is a lack of the concept of ensuring the cybersecurity, and it's especially in the insurance sector. For example, how they can do impact assessment for the clients and also for the customers. So if you can please shed some lights on the impact assessments, how can we ensure a proper or a win-win, let's say, cybersecurity insurance for the clients and for the insurance company. Especially 2 years ago, we've met some of the cybersecurity or insurance companies that they do provide a cybersecurity insurance, and we didn't agree on how the impact assessment would be and what's the next steps that needs to be further discussed.
I am absolutely looking for a company, an organization that can help with the impact assessment. I've yet to find one that is comprehensive enough and one that will meet the standards for what would be actuarial tables for an insurance company. So I don't have a great answer for you. But I'm looking, if anybody has a good model for, and this is where some of the artificial intelligence models will come in, to help us understand all of the vulnerabilities, rank order those vulnerabilities, translate that into risk, allow a decision maker like yourself to determine what's your highest risk effort, and go after that, and then build the model that helps. But I don't have a company that does that yet. So if anybody has a company that helps to do the assessment network, defense, data assessment to drive actuarial tables, I would love to talk to them. You have a question? Okay, here's one.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm curious on getting your views with regards to cybersecurity talent shortage. Seems to be something that comes up in every single event, at least in my 18 years of humble experience. I'm not sure how you see this as something that can be solved or potentially be reduced, and what's your views on it, managing large cybersecurity teams, and how have you overcome this major challenge?
On the 19th of July, the White House had a summit to address this very issue. And out of the summit was a number that says, in the United States alone, there's 700,000 workforce roles that are vacant, and there's no relief in sight. Universities will not be able to catch up. So you've got to build an apprenticeship program that identifies the workforce roles in detail, assess a group of people for both aptitude and psychology, train them specifically to fill the work roles, and then manage that talent over time. A 4-year university degree is interesting, but is not the answer. So how do you find enough people to fill just the United States alone? Because if you extrapolate that shortage to the global force, it's got to be 3+ million shortfalls. So we're starting to look at how we can train both in the physical and virtual space, screen and assess, align the individuals to work role, and do that at a much faster pace than we currently do. But we're not going to catch up anytime soon. The worst part of this is in the military, as we train individuals, we get big corporations that come along and say, we'll pay you $200,000 and we'll give you a Tesla and if you come and work for us. So we're losing people almost as fast as we're training them. But I think the end game is not a 4-year degree. It's an apprentice journeyman mastery program, screening, training, focused training, managing the talent over time. And oh, by the way, there are people in your organizations who are misaligned. So how do you screen across your organization and find the people who are best served by being in the cyber space as opposed to being a storefront or shelf stocker in your organization? So no quick answer, no quick win on this one. This is going to take a good bit of time. And so again, those of us who are in the training space, there'll be plenty of opportunities going forward. In the back here.
Yeah, assalamu alaikum. How do you identify the insider threats in general in cybersecurity, essentially? Since most of the attacks, essentially in all the cyber attacks related to any organization, usually starts with an insider threat.
The numbers are something on the order of 70% of the hacks that occur start from the insider. And the insider generally is about someone who clicks on a link, a phishing scheme. It's not often a malicious person inside, although there are some. But for the most part, it's just bad behavior. I used to tell folks that I could probably put on the subject line, do not click on this link, and about 4.5% of the folks will click on the link. Just out of curiosity. And now you're getting folks who are socially engineering links to make it even more appealing. The average, I'm told, is about 10% of an organization will click on a link, a phishing exercise. About 10%. If you're below that 10%, you're doing very well. But it's about 10% average. I just did an exercise with an organization that was tailored, socially engineered, and 56% of the folks clicked on the link. And that's the future. Socially engineered phishing scheme that will lead to insider threat. Challenge, training, continuous monitoring of individuals, retrain those who click on the link, and hold them accountable.
Yeah, but
that's the only way to drive the numbers down.
Yeah, but how do you manage it? How do you balance that with the privacy and the ethicality of privacy of the individuals usually? Because usually the argument against monitoring individuals and activities of the individuals is that their privacy is going to be breached at that point.
I don't see it as a privacy issue because I'm not monitoring their day-to-day activity and their keystrokes. I'm recording when they click on a link from an exercise to test what they've learned about phishing and defending inside the network. So long as I'm not monitoring keystrokes in their day-to-day activities, I don't see that as a privacy issue. You're very welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We're going to we want to thank you and give you a small award for your speech today and your contribution. Thank you so much, Vince. We really appreciate your time. Thank you.